What's the haps, my horror hounds? Sugar Pants back with you for another season finale. Boy, they go fast, don't they? But I always try to go out with a bang and serve up the best of the season for the final course. And today's meaty morsel is definitely the one to go out on. 1988's Brain Damage, a psychotic psychotrope about a velvet-voiced parasite with a hunger for brains, which on paper sounds like a hoot and a half. But in practice, it's way more fun than it has any right to be. So let's get to that sleaze docket and see what this cerebral cinema slimeball has in store for us all. We have 6 dead bodies, 32 cups blood, 2 cups vomit, approximately 2,692 gallons parasitic narcotic, 2 naked breasts, 2 naked butts, spaghetti and meat brains, seizure instigators, 80s punkery, planetarium laser light shows, blood-soaked undies, forehead chomping, ear-brain pull, ear-blood fountain, brain hemorrhaging, 1 overly friendly communal shower, 1 brotherly cuckold, parasite fellatio, and 1 movie monster special guest appearance. We begin with spooky artifacts and carved antiquities. Wait a second, is this a Charles Band production? No? It's not. But seriously, how many of his movies start exactly this way? Morris comes home and engages enough locks to say, "Something's up with this household." His wife Martha comes to greet him, and he says he had to go all the way to that gourmet deli. Martha takes his package to the kitchen, and we see it's a bundle of small brains. Martha prepares a plate and takes it to Almer, who's apparently hanging out in the bathroom. But when she gets there, she just screams and drops the plate of brains. Morris comes in to find a bathtub full of water and nothing else. The two start tearing the place apart looking for whoever this Almer is. Martha's digging through the pantry. Oh, look, it's Ivanka's favorite brand of beans. Morris is ripping his bookcase apart, but whatever they're looking for isn't to be found. Martha simply crumples to the floor, sobbing and screaming. Elsewhere, a guy opens the door for a girl who comes in to find her boyfriend Brian is still asleep. Barbara says they have to leave in a few minutes, but then says he looks awful. Brian says he feels awful and suggests something's going around. Morris and Martha are now heading through the apartment complex asking to see people's bathtubs. Barbara says Brian is in no shape to go out and says she'll stay with him. Brian says there's no reason she needs to miss out on the concert and asks his brother Mike if he'll go with her instead. He tells them he just needs some sleep and he will be fine. They pass by a door covered in locks, and we realize Morris and Martha live just down the hallway. Inside, they're going through some serious withdrawals. After a bit, Brian wakes up and notices his bed is covered in blood.
Holy shit, did you kill someone?
No, I just had a huge fat period.
That seems like a lot of blood.
It's way more than normal.
He feels around and notices there's something wrong with the back of his neck. He's disoriented, lights are flashing, so he crawls back to his bedroom to stare at the shockingly bright ceiling light. Suddenly, the room starts filling with Mountain Dew voltage. Time for a weekend-long Halo marathon, bitches. It's BYOC only, guys, as I've got the beverages covered. We get some mellow, bluesy bass line, and the ceiling light starts looking more like an eyeball. Brian is eventually washed over by the blue liquid, and everything just fades away. Once the high leaves, Brian is left puzzled until he remembers the blood. He checks the back of his neck and notices a puncture wound, and also that the bathtub is full. He calls out to whomever is in his apartment, and a gurgling, twisting thing from under his shirt reveals himself.
Hi.
This is Almer, or Elmer if you prefer, a parasitic entity that promises a life without worry or pain or loneliness.
A life filled instead with colors and music and euphoria.
I gotta say, the parasite's voice is not what I was expecting. Downright charming and disarming. All Almer asks in return is to look and listen to the light and to take him on the occasional walk when he gets hungry. Almer tells Brian to put him on his neck and to trust him. Once attached, Almer opens his horrible maw and out comes a dripping needle-like appendage that goes straight into Brian's brain, giving him a hit of the good shit. Suddenly, the world gets all groovy and orgasmic. Later on, Mike and Barbara come back and seem a little too flirty considering one is in a relationship with the other's sibling. Hang on, time out. So we live in a world where Kellogg's is a thing, but we still buy the generic off-brand Frosted Flakes? Well, at least we still have purple drink.
I want some grape drink, baby. It's purple.
They go to check on Brian, but he's not in his well-made bed. Mike's taking a nice jogging tour of the more scenic parts of New York City. Though I suppose it helps when you're tripping balls. I gotta say, I love how we get both sides of the drug here. The pretty lights of the user and the sober bystander watching a tweaker screaming through a junkyard. Security guy goes to check out Brian's one-man rave and finds Almer during his pat-down, who goes straight for the headshot. But Brian's so baked, even watching a guy get his skull chewed open is fucking awesome. Once the security guy is dead, Almer gorges himself on cerebellum. Brian asks for another hit, and Almer obliges, then sinks back down into Brian's jacket. Some time passes, and Barbara comes over to hear Mike saying Brian is like a completely different person. He doesn't answer the phone. He probably isn't leaving the apartment, and if he's not in his room, he's in the bathroom. There are buckets of water all over, and new door locks everywhere. Barbara pounds on the door to remind Brian that they have a date, and he says he'll be right out. But Almer pops up and sprays him with some drug, which I suppose is better than bath salts. Out on their date, Brian is doing his best Seth Brundle impression. Barbara immediately says he's on drugs, but Brian says,
Nothing that simple.
He tries to explain what happened, but Almer does something painful to prevent him from speaking. Suddenly, he starts going through withdrawals and sees brains instead of meatballs in his spaghetti. Brian takes off saying he doesn't feel good and leaves Barbara with the check. He speedwalks his way down the street until he finds a quiet alley. Almer pops up to give him another hit of the juice, and he slips into the nearby nightclub. Brian's mood is entirely way too high for this scene, but that's what catches the attention of some leather gal at the bar. She pulls him out on the dance floor and enjoys watching him ride the snake. Jesus, someone get him a binky and some water. Eventually, the two make their way towards the back and slip out into the alley to make out. Brian starts laughing uncontrollably, and she steps on the gas.
Feels like you got a real monster in there.
She leans him up against a post and undoes his pants, but it's not the veiny purple beast she was expecting. Hold it, hold it. Now, I'm going to cut this next scene because apparently it was so offensive to the production crew they actually walked out and refused to work during the shooting. And I have to admit, I definitely can see why they felt that way. If you want to see it, you're just going to have to get your hands on an uncensored copy, because this and one other scene were originally cut to avoid an X rating. Barbara calls Mike to ask if Brian made it back home, but he's still out. Specifically, he's digging through some trash cans to dispose of his blood-covered underwear. Because you see, the previous scene was kind of messy. Suddenly, Morris steps out from the shadows to tell Brian he's foolishly feeding Almer human brains and making him strong. He demands that he return Almer, and apparently the parasite can be traced back to the 13th century. We get a long-winded history lesson full of names I never heard in my Midwestern history class. Eventually, it traveled to Africa, where it was given deep religious value. It traded from host to host until Morris eventually tracked him down and brought him to New York. Eventually, Brian gets away, and Morris crumples into a heap.
Run! 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 Run!
Finally, back home, Brian starts packing because he insists that he's got to be in control. Mike says he and Barbara want to help him if he's in trouble, but he has to tell them what's going on. Brian ignores him and leaves with his hastily packed bag. Jumping off the subway line, Brian ends up at a shady hotel and books a room. He pulls Almer out of his shirt and places him in some water in the sink and starts demanding answers. First up, was anything Morris said true? Almer says they fed him animal brains and kept him weak so that they could keep themselves supplied with the drug. He also asks what happened at the club, and Almer says part of what he does is to make sure Brian doesn't remember the unpleasant details. Brian is definitely upset when Almer reminds him they've killed 2 people, but he offers to give him a hit to take his mind off things. And that's when Almer's attitude changes from cute to diabolical.
We'll do anything I want us to do. You're mine now, Brian. I own you.
Brian insists he's going cold turkey, but Almer says he's not strong enough. In fact, he's kind of gleeful at the idea of a challenge of who's going to crack first, Brian for drugs or Almer for brains. A fade cuts us ahead in time, and Brian is not doing well at all. He's sweating, vomiting, and begging for it to stop. Meanwhile, Almer is relentlessly reminding him the only thing that'll help is another hit. Finally, looking quite ghoulish, Brian notices blood draining from his ear. He reaches in and finds some bloody bits of flesh falling off of him. He then pulls some stringing tissue that just doesn't stop coming. Finally, at the end of his rope, he gives one hard pull and his whole fucking ear falls off, and gallons of blood pour from the wound. Brian finally snaps out of the hallucination while Almer laughs maniacally. This next segment is pretty hard to watch. Not so much for the gore, though. Just watching Brian go through this hell while the drug is literally laughing at him and telling him to just take some more so the pain will go away. Finally, Brian has had enough and he weakly begs Almer for some more drugs. But Almer's too busy singing away, completely unaffected by his own hunger compared to Brian's. He agrees to help him, but first, Almer gets his. Brian slips out the door and tries to open up other rooms, but in this neighborhood, we lock the doors. Brian hears running water and makes his way to the shower facilities, where he runs into a very friendly slab of beef.
Hey, man, you new here? You okay?
Yeah.
Hey, it's cool. What's gonna bother you?
Almer slips out of Brian's towel and slithers away. The muscle man leaves unharmed, and Almer finds his prey in the bathroom stall. Immediately latching onto his forehead, Brian gets his first sober look at Almer's work. Blood splatters all over the bathroom walls, floors, and ceiling, and a mass of brains hits the floor as the victim dies. Brian grabs his stuff and leaves. He makes his way to his apartment and climbs into bed. Mike comes in the front door and Barbara is feeling pretty low, wrongly assuming Brian has broken up with her. Mike makes his move and ends up taking Barbara to bed. You know, for a guy who's had a whole lot of low points over the last few days, listening to his girlfriend nail his brother is probably pretty far into relapse territory. And Almer proves me right. Brian looks up into the ceiling and we get a bit of laser Judas Priest before a quick fantasy of eating out Barbara's brains. Brian approaches Mike and Barbara and tells them they have to leave so they don't get hurt. He's basically given up on fighting Almer and just wants his loved ones out of harm's way. He takes off, but Barbara follows him to the subway platform and gets on the train with him. She tries to have a conversation with him, but every time she looks away, Almer pops out of his mouth trying to discreetly attack. And that's when this happens.
I understood that reference.
Barbara admits that she doesn't want to lose Brian and kisses him. We hear Almer's gurgling noises, and after a while, blood falls from their joined mouths. Brian gently lays Barbara's dead body down on the seat and gets off the train. Brian makes his way back to the alleyway where he ran into Morris, hoping to run into him again. Doesn't take long before both he and Martha show up. Morris pulls a gun, and Martha gives Brian a pat-down until she finds Almer. She sits down and pets him lovingly until he attacks and chews through her skull. Morris tries to pull him off but is unsuccessful, and in the struggle drops his gun. Brian grabs the gun and Almer attacks Morris too. Little guy sure is hungry tonight. After his meal, Almer tells Brian to put him on his neck so they can get out of there. Right as he injects his needly appendage, Morris somehow gets up and crushes Almer to death. Unfortunately, in doing so, he forces a gargantuan dose of drug into Brian's brain.
Gargantuan. You know, I've always liked that word, gargantuan. I so rarely have an opportunity to use it in a sentence.
Almer thrashes around in a pool of blood before dying from his injuries. Brian's skull starts hemorrhaging and blue juice starts squirting out. He makes his way back to his apartment as his brain begins to erupt through his skull. All the screaming has finally caught the attention of the police, who are questioning tenants. Brian holds the gun against his forehead, and the angry tenants outside hear a gunshot. Mike and the police run to Brian's room to see a large opening in his skull as light and electricity pour out. The end. Whew, now there's food for thought. Oh, kiss my grits. I'm a writing staff of one, so you can just get all the way off my fat painted ass. You know, once you strip away the jokes and the parasite and all the comedy, you get a really dark look into the world of substance abuse. In fact, writer-director Frank Henenlotter apparently gave up cocaine and wrote Brain Dead as a metaphor for what he went through. But Brain Damage isn't his only dual credit. He wrote and directed several movies, including Basket Case 1, 2, and 3, as well as the sleaze-tastic Frankenhooker. Spoiler alert, I'll be covering that one soon enough. Handsome pretty boy Rick Hurst, our parasite carrier, got his acting debut in this very feature and went on to be quite the staple in daytime soaps. 106 episodes of Days of Our Lives, 40 episodes of Guiding Light, 18 episodes of The Young and the Restless, 242 episodes of The Bold and the Beautiful, and 619 episodes of General Hospital. And in an uncredited role, Almer was voiced by John Zachary, a horror host Hall of Famer. Lots of past horror enthusiasts enjoyed his programs Shock Theater, Zachary at Large, The Zachary Show, and Chiller Theater. Unfortunately, Zachary was before my time and reruns didn't broadcast where I grew up. But I definitely enjoy watching some of his archived footage, and I invite you to do the same. Especially if you enjoyed his performance as the brain-chomping wiggleworm in today's feature. Joe Bob Briggs even had him on during an episode of Joe Bob's Drive-In Theater. Well, that brings us to the end of another greasy serving of Hollywood's low-quality cuisine. And the end of the season means we gotta go back and see just how grimy it was as we view the end of Season 3 Sleaze docket. We had 47 dead bodies, 123 cups blood, 26 naked breasts, 7 naked butts, and 4 naked bajingos. And how does that stack up to previous seasons? Well, Season 1. And then Season 2. So basically, this has been the bloodiest season with the highest stack of bodies so far. But it makes one wonder if that upward trend will continue. I guess we'll just have to wait and see what Season 4 will bring us all the way of the 3 Bs. Blood, bodies, and boobies. And I hope to see you all with young, fresh minds and empty tummies just hungry for more of the basement bile. As always, thank you for your wonderful support. The show really couldn't go on without my loyally rabid fans. So until I greet you all in Season 4, this is your old pal Sugar Pants. See you in your dreams.
Nuclear war! They're crying all over the place. They're crying in America. They're crying in Europe. The whole world's gonna come to an end. If it's gonna go, man, it's gonna go. And I'm gonna enjoy seeing this whole friggin' world blow up. And I'm gonna be smiling, having my beer, and I'm gonna see this last blast, baby.